Hey QBs, we're going to talk about sensation and perception today, just some of the basic concepts to go along with a virtual notebook that you will complete after this presentation. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at our objective for today is that students will be able to decipher the difference between sensation and perception and identify each. Okay. I want you to take a look here at this image and scan the image. I want you to think about, what do you see? Do you see anything in this image? Maybe something hidden? Look around for it. Yes, some of you found it. It is a Dalmatian. Okay, it is a Dalmatian. So sensation and perception, when you think about our senses that we have, not only our five main senses, but there are other senses like ESP and so forth, telepathy. But our five main senses is what we're talking about here. That is what enabled you to be able to see the Dalmatian. Okay, and as we define sensation, it is the process by which you detect physical energy from your environment and encode it as neural signals. So you have sensory receptors. Remember, we've talked about in our bio unit, sensory receptors like, the ends of your fingers and your skin and your tongue. Those sensory receptors take information and bring it to the brain for processing. That is called bottom-up processing. That is sensation, okay? On the flip side, perception, okay, is how we select, organize, and interpret our sensations. And this enables us to recognize meaningful objects and events through how we perceive things, okay? And instead of bottom-up processing like sensation, this is called top-down processing, all right? So we're able to process in our brain here first. Perception of stimuli, perceptions of stimuli, this is what the brain is trying to figure out, okay? And then we're able to make it meaningful in our lives, okay? The next slide is going to be kind of quirky for some of you. I want you to think about what you see here. You may need to squint your eyes to be able to see an alternate image on this page. I'll give you a minute to kind of look, squint, figure it out. You're right, it's Marilyn Monroe, okay, and Albert Einstein. You have to squint your eyes or kind of look from different angles to be able to see Marilyn Monroe. It's very hard for me to see Marilyn Monroe. Even when I squint, it's difficult for me to see her, but she is still there. And so is Albert Einstein. So again, it's our eyes, the way we perceive things, to be able to make sense out of stimuli, okay? The basic principles of sensing the world include sensation and perception there, bottom-up and top-down processing, selective attention, and psychophysics. So I already kind of looked at that sensation and perception, and now we're going to look at that bottom-up and top-down processing and the rest of those terms here in more detail. I want you to take a look at this image. There are faces aside from the cowboy on the horse and the horse's faces. There are faces actually in the trees, okay, and the nature here of this image. I want you to think about and try to come up with, how many do you see? I'll give you a second to look. Okay, we'll come back to this picture in just a minute. All right, so what you're doing here is bottom-up processing. This is where you have sensory analysis that starts at the entry level, sensation, okay? And it starts with those sensory receptors and they work up to a higher level, up to that brain for processing. Okay, so your sensory eyes here are trying to figure out what it was you're watching. Okay, and the forest has eyes. It sounds like a scary movie, I know. Halloween's coming up, so the forest has eyes. The hills have eyes. I think that's actually a real movie. All right, so where did you see faces? Okay, here we go. You see faces here, here, there's one in the trees, here, a partial face, a face, a face, a face, a face, a face, a face there, one there, one there. And I actually think that there is one kind of right here. Now that I'm looking at it, there possibly might be a face right here as well. Okay. this is one of those fun sensation perception images. There are so many of them out there in the world. As you look at things, what do you see? Do you see this? Do you see that? Is it 3D? Is it not 3D? That's where a lot of these images come into play, and they're a lot of fun. Okay, so top-down processing. This is constructing perceptions, drawing on both sensations, and coming bottom up and on our experience and expectations, which is perception. Okay, so that's top down. It comes from the top, from our brains down to the rest of our body for that organization stuff. Okay, so let's move on to selective attention. Okay, selective attention is something that teenagers do a lot of. Okay, maybe it's not by choice. Okay, but you do have some selective attention, and I say some adults do too. Okay, so this is consciously focused on a particular stimulus while not focusing on another. We are flooded with millions and millions of different bits of stimuli all the time, but we only process a small amount. I mean, you think about it, like when you walk into school, if you were to actually walk into Hickman High School with hundreds of other students, there are hundreds of students, think about it, that are walking right next to you. But are you paying attention to each one? What they are saying, what they are wearing, okay, where they are going, what they look like? No, because it's too much information. There's so much going on that you're not aware of. It's so much stimuli competing for your attention. You only selectively pay attention to a small parts, okay? A hearing part of this, or a hearing example, is a cocktail party effect of selective attention. This is the ability to listen to one voice among many when you're able to pay attention despite distractions. So if you're like in a busy classroom where lots of conversations going on, and then you hear somebody say your name, and all of a sudden you're like, who, what? I heard my name. Okay, even though there's so much busyness going on around you, you're still able to hear and focus on that one name, or your name being called, and that's called the cocktail party effect. Okay, selective attention is also with visual stimuli. It goes along with visual stimuli. So we're going to watch this clip here and see what happens.
This is an awareness test. How many passes does the team in white make?
Go!
The answer is 13. But did you see the moonwalking bear?
Did you, huh? Yeah.
Go!
There he is. All right, so this is actually a bicycle commercial. So look out for cyclists. And again, that is an example of selective attention when you're looking out for bicyclists there. So selective attention here, if we're going to define it, okay, or inattentional blindness, excuse me, if we're going to define it, refers to the inability to see an object or a person in our midst. Okay, if you failed to see the moonwalking bear, then you did have some inattentional blindness at that point. Inattentional blindness also impacts our driving. And you think about driving of teenagers, of adults, there are so many things that are distracting us nowadays, more so now than there were 10, 15 years ago. If you look at the statistics here, 6 out of 10 teen crashes involve driver distraction. And that is true. I mean, we have, again, think about it. You've got phones that are competing for attention, the radio, you have friends in the car. I know that there are many parents that refuse to allow more than like 1 or 2 friends ride in a car with their teenager because of the possibility of distractions, right? So you've got your speed distraction, music, cell phone. You've got all of these distractions here, things competing for your attention. Okay, and this unintentional blindness here, this is what causes you to get into accidents. Okay, let's go on to change blindness. change blindness is failing to notice changes in the environment. So when you're focusing on something and then you're unable to figure out like, oh, well, that person changed here. That's not the same person anymore. You're going to see this as an example in the virtual notebook. And then this is an example from like a like hidden camera episode of when this guy, you see he's looking, asking for directions, and then you've got these guys here bringing a picture through or something. They're distracting this man. Well, this original guy here, he's going to take the painting and walk away and leave this guy behind, and they're going to see if, you know, this older gentleman notices the change between the two. And that is an example of change blindness. And again, you'll see that in a video clip in our virtual notebook. Okay. But moving on to choice blindness, okay? Choice blindness occurs when we fail to recognize the choice we have made moments after doing so. An example of this is a study done in Sweden. There are 120 volunteers who were showed two female faces, and they were asked which was more attractive, okay? Then the pictures were switched up, and they showed the opposite woman, and then the opposite woman's picture, and asked why they chose that woman when actually they had chose the other person. And only 13% of the people noticed that that was the wrong picture. Okay, so that's an example of choice blindness. Okay, we also have change deafness. And this is a physical change goes unnoticed by a listener. An example of this is that you have 40% of people fail to notice a speaker change when someone is reading them a list, that they must focus on the words rather than the speaker themselves. Okay, so this is an actual, I mean, these are things that happen, and they probably maybe have happened to you. If they haven't happened yet, they're likely to happen at some point in your life. Choice blindness and change deafness. Okay, let's move on to psychophysics. The virtual notebook is going to talk about psychophysics, and you've got a video to watch with this. And this is the study of the relationship between physical energy and psychological experiences. I mean, think about if you could sense everything, life would like literally hurt. So we can only take a window of what is out there, and that's what this is like psychophysics. Again, the relationship between physical stimuli and our psychological experiences to them. Okay. So example here are thresholds. It's a place or a point of entering or beginning. We have absolute thresholds, subliminal stimulation, difference thresholds in Weber's law, and then signal detection theory. So we're going to look at each one of these real quick, starting with absolute thresholds. So absolute thresholds are the smallest amount of stimulus that we can detect, or the minimum stimulus needed to detect a particular stimulus 50% of the time. So the smallest amount of a stimulus that we can detect. And an example of this is like a great one for tonight. My dog is passing gas, okay? So an example would be, is passing gas just when you just barely hear my dog doing that or just barely smell it, that is my absolute threshold, okay? Just when you're able to detect it, that's your absolute threshold. Okay, and the virtual notebook is going to give you another example with this as well. Okay, so that's absolute threshold. When you think about subliminal stimulation, okay, so this is where you're given a message that's just below your threshold for conscious awareness. And sometimes these can be in songs, with advertising. They used to do like this with movie theaters, cut the movie theater film with clips of like soda or popcorn to try to get the crowd goers to go to the concession stands to buy more. Actually, in truth, when you look at the research does not support that subliminal messages work in trying to get people to buy different products. Okay, so that's subliminal stimulation. That's a part of your threshold. Then we also have difference threshold. Okay, this is the minimal difference needed to notice a stimulus change. Okay, it's a detectable difference. Increases with the size of the stimulus, and it's also known as the just noticeable difference. Okay, so this would be an example of like Apple Jacks and Fruit Loops. It's like, how much of this change do you notice here? Like, where do you notice? Is that I can notice a difference between Fruit Loops and Apple Jacks. Okay, but it's the minimal difference needed to notice the change. But both of those cereals are so similar. Okay. It's kind of like too, like when you're watching maybe The Family Guy. But in the other room, there's a loud noise. Maybe your mom's making dinner or using a mixer. Okay, so you turn up the volume of the television, right? So you can hear your show, and you turn it up one level and you really don't notice the difference, right? So you have to turn it up maybe 4 or 5 levels before you notice an actual difference. So that would be your difference threshold, okay? We have Weber's law, okay? Weber's law here is somewhat similar to this difference threshold, okay? It's where two stimuli must differ by a constant proportion for their difference to be detectable, okay? So the more intense the stimulus, the more it needs to change before you notice a difference, okay? So an example here is the just noticeable difference with this man holding these two weighted items. So the person can detect the difference between a 100-gram weight and a 105-gram comparison weight, but cannot detect a smaller difference. So the just noticeable difference is 5 grams. Okay. With a 200-gram weight, the comparison weight must be 210 grams before the person can detect the difference. So the just noticeable difference is 10 grams. Okay. And then note that for both 100 and 200-gram weights, the ratio of just noticeable difference to weight is the same. And this ratio is the Weber fraction. Okay, so this is like that difference threshold again. Lastly, we have the signal detection theory. The signal detection theory, a detection depends upon a combination of stimulus and intensity, background noise, and a person's physical condition, biases, and level of motivation. Basically, the signal detection theory explains why people respond differently to the same stimuli, okay? So we respond differently to the same stimuli, and that's what this is trying to explain, why we do this, all right? An example would be, with ICU patients, a nurse needs to be trained to pay attention to different noises, when someone else may be responding differently to those noises because they don't know what they're supposed to be listening for because they're not an ICU nurse, okay? So why people respond differently to different stimuli. Lastly, let's look at sensory adaptation, okay? Sensory adaptation. You guys have probably experienced this quite often. You just maybe didn't know that there was a term for it. And this is our diminishing sensitivity to an unchanging stimulus. Our receptors fire less frequently, and the sensation often fades and disappears. So after constant exposure to a stimulus, our nerve cells are firing less frequently, and so we get used to the stimulus. So think about examples would be, have you ever jumped into a cold swimming pool or a cold lake, and after maybe 10, 15, 20 minutes of swimming, you don't notice that it's cold anymore. So you have a diminished sensitivity to it. Or maybe like a smell. If there's a smell in your room, a smell in your house, you notice it right away. And then after some time within that smell, you have a diminished sensitivity to it. Okay, so that is sensory adaptation. One thing that does not revolve around, or does not go into the sensory adaptation, is our vision. Okay, it doesn't affect our vision because our eyes are constantly shifting. Okay, so that's it for our quick presentation here of just the basic concepts of sensation and perception. This goes along with Module 16 in your textbook. After this, I want you to look at the virtual notebook in Schoology in our Week 4 Tuesday folder so that you can go through and experience some of these more basic concepts and interact with them with different videos. Okay, thanks guys. Talk to you soon.